Some more paintings from this section, actually 3, not 2, and they all show the lives of slightly poorer people or completely poor people, or not even people. So the first one, Richard Redgrave, the poor teacher, also known as the governess. It shows a young woman, clearly an orphan. She's wearing mourning clothes, so she's wearing the clothes that are typical for people who lost a relative, working as a teacher or as a private governess for a group of young girls. And again, we have a realistic image of a young woman and an interior laden with symbolism. So, for example, the idea that the girls in the charge of the teacher are all in the sunlight. They're playing together. They are enjoying each other's company, and the teacher herself is sad and lonely and isolated, or also kind of visually isolated. So the idea was really to draw the attention of the viewers to the plight of the servants, to the plight of those less fortunate. Becoming a governess was one of the very few respectable career options for impoverished women from the middle class. So if a lower middle class family lost their father, for example, and they had to earn their living, becoming a governess was one of the very few available respectable options for young women. Another image by Sir Edwin Landseer, one of the favorite painters of Queen Victoria, and also this is one of his favorite paintings that was bought by the Queen, The Old Shepherd's Chief Mourner. So again, the subject of death, but this time the main hero of this painting is dead already, probably lying in the coffin. And the chief mourner, the person who is most bereaved, like a widow really, is the faithful little dog. And we can also see the little details, the images added to this painting to indicate the entire situation of this old shepherd. We can learn this happens in Scotland. There is a very characteristic Scottish headwear, a beret, and this was called the Tam O'Shanter beret, on the floor. So this happens in Scotland, and the man was probably single, so either a bachelor or a widower. We do not really know, but the interior looks poor. There is a Bible lying somewhere, so he was what we may imagine a pious man, so a moral man to the Victorians. There is also a flask made of animal horn, which traditionally held whiskey, so he was not a saint. He enjoyed life as well. Apparently some people have come and gone. They didn't leave flowers, they just left those little green twigs that they put on the coffin, and perhaps the blanket belonged to the shepherd himself. And now, when everybody is gone, only this poor sad doggy remains to weep for their master. This was something that spoke to the Victorians a lot, this anthropomorphizing image of animals. Victoria loved animals, and she especially loved dogs. So when she saw this painting, this was painted in 1837, so just as she came to the throne. So this was her first Royal Academy exhibition, and this was one of the paintings that she actually bought there because she loved it so much. And throughout her life, she loved the dogs. She even promoted some legislation against cruelty to animals. And the last one here is a fallen woman, painted by John Rodham Spencer Stanhope. The title is Thoughts of the Past, and we have a young, sad and perhaps ill-looking woman somewhere in a small room near the port, and there are again lots of details. These narrative paintings tend to be very detailed, so you have lots of little things to look for, and there are some indications that she is a sex worker. There is some money, there are some, there's I think a hat or gloves left by a man, so an indication that she meets her clients here in this room. She looks very sad and resigned, and the title suggests that she regrets her life choices and perhaps dreams of the past when she was happy and innocent, and perhaps her situation was better. Some art historians even suggest what will happen next. There is a bridge visible in the distance across the window, so many images show drowned women, the fallen women who either end their lives living under the bridge as homeless people, or they actually throw themselves from the bridge and are found drowned. So we may assume that this woman also is contemplating suicide, and we do not know how it will end for her. So these are the mainstream Victorian painters and mainstream Victorian academic art. And for the remainder of this week's video, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Pre-Raphaelites, so the most famous group of young artistic rebels from the Victorian period. Originally there were 7 of them, but you really need to remember 3 names: John Everett Millais, William Holman Hunt, and Dante Gabriel Rossetti. They were in the early 20s. They started their education to become artists. Especially John Everett Millais was a kind of wonder child. He was one of the youngest students ever to be accepted to the Royal Academy of Arts. I think he was 11 when he was first accepted, so by the time he was 20 he was a kind of already educated but not yet famous young painter. And there were a group of friends who wanted to revolutionize the art of painting. They called themselves the Pre-Raphaelites because they were mostly fascinated by the period in the history of art before Raphael, before the great artists of the Italian Renaissance. So basically the Middle Ages. They were one of the groups that really popularized this romanticized image of the Middle Ages. The stories of damsels in distress and such images. They produced a lot of images showing women, although they made a point of not hiring the services of professional models. They only portrayed the friends and family members and lovers and wives. The idea was, of course, to befriend the models and try to paint them without having to pay for it. But they are definitely one of the most interesting groups of the period. They do not look really so rebellious right now, but they were in the middle of the 19th century when they first started exhibiting their work. One of the reasons was they did not really idealize their subjects, so even if there was a religious theme showing, I don't know, Virgin Mary or Jesus, they would not be idealized, they would be like realistically shown. They would pay a lot of attention to details, so they would research everything, not only the human form, but everything like plants or some props they were using. They very often produced illustrative works, so the works that would illustrate some literary stories. We have two works, one by Millet and one by William Holman Hunt, illustrating a story of Isabella and the pot of basil. One is called Isabella, or Lorenzo and Isabella. One is called Isabella and the pot of basil. The story about secret lovers and the brothers of the young woman do not accept her choice of boyfriend, so they have him killed, and she discovers the body, chops off the head and hides the head in the big pot of basil, so the herb. So we have two moments in this story, one by Millet showing the young lovers at a table during some sort of feast. The brothers are seated opposite and they look quite menacing. One is trying actually to kick the dog that rests his head on Isabella's lap. The other one is looking at the young people through the glass of red wine, so kind of like blood or something. There are some more people at the table, and they are all friends and family of the Pre-Raphaelites. Actually, the young man at the back of the table drinking something from a glass is Dante Gabriel Rossetti himself. So they were just painting each other and their friends. This was one of the first paintings produced by the Pre-Raphaelites according to their ideas of sincerity and carefulness to detail that they expressed in their manifesto. The first thing they did was to have a manifesto. Then some years later, another of the original members, William Holman Hunt, returned to the subject and showed another model as Isabella crying over the pot of basil. This is all kind of imagined Middle Ages or early Renaissance with a lot of historical costume, but there is a lot of Victorian values here as well. Very often there is this kind of sympathetic image of a woman, and the woman who is really shown as very emotional, and these were real women, so these are realistic portraits of friends and family posed as literary characters. Probably the most famous of these works is the most famous Victorian Ophelia by John Everett Miller, painted in 1852, starring Elizabeth Siddal, the young beauty befriended by the Pre-Raphaelites, who would later become the long-time mistress, a kind of pupil, and eventually the wife of Dante Gabriel Rossetti. So here we have her posing as Ophelia in a beautiful embroidered dress, drowning. And actually, if you look at it, she looks like she's posing in a bathtub, and this is what happened. She posed in a bath full of water, and she caught a chill, and her father actually threatened to press charges if her life was in danger. Later on, we have another painting showing Elizabeth Siddal, painted by her husband, Dante Gabriel Rossetti, many years later. And there is a story about this one, a rather spooky Gothic story. Because apparently this image called Beata Beatrix, so the character from Dante's, the Italian poet Dante's Divine Comedy. If you look at the name of the author, Dante Gabriel Rossetti, yes, he was inspired by Dante a lot. And they had a thing with Lizzie Siddal that she was his Beatrice. And they had a kind of long relationship. It was not always very happy, and especially after they finally married, like 10 years after, problems started to mount. Rossetti was not an easy person to live with. He was an alcoholic, he was a drug addict, he met other women. Lizzie was increasingly depressed. She started using drugs as well, mostly laudanum, which was a kind of opium solution that you could buy at any drugstore, so any pharmacy. So basically, this was not even known how dangerous it was. She had a miscarriage, so there were all kinds of problems. And once, when Dante Gabriel returned home from his regular round of pubs and brothels, he found Lizzie dead on the sofa, poisoned by laudanum. And we will never know whether it was an accidental overdose or an actual suicide, but Rossetti suddenly became overcome with grief and remorse, and in a typical manner he started painting Lizzie shortly after her death. So her eyes are closed. We can assume that this is a fresh corpse. And that he found as Beatrice being taken to heaven. So the character from Dante's poetry, and we have the image of Dante and the angel, kind of guardian angel in the background, and a lot of symbolism here referring to Dante and Beatrice, but also referring to Rossetti and Lizzie, like the hour on this sundial is the hour when she died. The poppy in the beak of the bird is actually the plant used for producing laudanum. So there are all kinds of things alluding to their private tragedy. There is another story connected with this, that he was so full of remorse that he took the only existing manuscript of some of his poems. He put those poems with Lizzie into the coffin, and they were buried with her. But some years later he thought that he was perhaps a bit too fast with that, so he decided to dig up the coffin and take the poems back. Yes, well, you can Google that. It's a very tragic story, but it's a kind of spooky story as well. Later on, Rossetti had a very close relationship. We do not really know whether they were lovers or just very close friends, with Jane Morris, the wife of William Morris, another intellectual artist, the founder of the arts and crafts movement, which was more about design rather than painting. Rossetti started painting Jane Morris as all kinds of characters from literary sources and legend, and here we have probably the most famous of these fancy portraits showing Jane Morris as Persephone, or Proserpine. This is the Roman name of the same goddess as Persephone. So we have the goddess being abducted to the underworld, and here this is not the moment of return. This is the moment when Persephone is alone in the underworld. She can perhaps see just a ray of light through some small window, and she holds the pomegranate in her hand, which is a fruit associated with Persephone, and in the mythology, because she ate a few seeds of this fruit, she cannot return from the underworld forever, but she must always go back there for a part of the year. So the idea of the fancy portrait, the idea of a realistic portrait, in this case showing a real woman. There are photographs of her and she really looked like this. She was kind of exotic, Greek looking, or more like kind of gypsy looking woman, posing as some sort of literary or mythological character. We have three more images. One is another superstar of Victorian painting, the one we met already, The Lady of Shalott, this time by William Holman Hunt, and this is another moment in the poem, the moment when the lady decides to abandon her work on the tapestry. As you can see, this is this great tapestry that she's working on, because she saw the reflection of Sir Lancelot in the mirror on the wall of her chamber in the tower. So here we have the precise moment when she just breaks away from her work. Her hair is kind of huge, you can see. There's a lot of interesting things happening in pre-Raphaelite paintings with hands and hair of the women sitters. I remember reading one of the written works. Somebody from an earlier edition of this course decided to write about the hair and hands of women in pre-Raphaelite paintings. It was very, very interesting because you can actually see a lot of symbolism here. And of course, most women in the 19th century, except perhaps for some rebellious wives of rebellious artists, would not wear their hair loose, ever, outside of the bedroom. So it was a very intimate thing to see the full length of a woman's hair. So here we have this great heroine I mentioned. Well, like Ophelia, she's one of the great heroines of Victorian art. Another image by William Holman Hunt, The Hireling Shepherd. So his take on one of the many takes on the subject of the fallen woman. So here we have this kind of temptress, shepherdess, tempting her male companion while the sheep are not being cared enough, and they, as you can see, they start going away and destroying some crops. And there is a lot of symbolism again. There is this little lamb eating green apples, and the green apples is not this kind of variety of green apples. These are unripe apples, and they are very bad for lambs and people as well. So perhaps this is the symbol of danger, or at least some sort of problems that the situation might cause. We also have, if you look close at the hand of the shepherd, like what he is showing to this woman is a big moth. It's a kind of big butterfly-like creature with a very distinctive, natural, of course, design of a death's head. So, so here we have again this ominous symbol of problems, potential, even deathly danger. I don't know, venereal disease, perhaps, or something. So that's another take on the fallen woman subject. This could be a good subject for your essay. And the last one here is by an artist who was not an original member but a close friend of the group, called Ford Madox Brown. The title is Work, and there again we have a big group of people. The idea is everyone is doing their little bit in the society. So we have the upper class people in the background on horseback, and there is a roadblock because there are some road works happening here. So we have the workers digging something in the middle of the street, and some people trying to pass by. We have some street sellers in the foreground. There is this poor young man with some herbs, selling the herbs in the street. We have two middle-class women trying to pass. One of them is carrying some religious pamphlets, so she's probably engaged in some sort of church charity. The other one is a fashionable lady of the middle class. We have some intellectuals on the right hand side. We have a political rally in the background. We have some more workers in the foreground, including some poor children. The eldest sister is minding her younger siblings. So the idea, again, very Victorian. The society as a whole is a perfectly working machine as long as everybody is doing their little bit. So this was a very short overview of some, for me, interesting images from Victorian art, but I strongly encourage you to Google and to find some more, and perhaps to be inspired, because this is a wonderful thing to analyze, because you can actually analyze these things in great detail, and they illustrate a lot of stuff about Victorian culture and Victorian society. So that's it. Thank you for this week.